Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Neighbor Claims He's the Owner of My Waterfront Property. Huge mistake. To really understand this story, I need to quickly explain the layout of my property. I have a waterfront property and in the backyard I get an amazing view of a river that runs past me, and then beyond that is woods and mountains. It is honestly beautiful, and for someone who likes nature but wants to live indoors, it is a dream come true. Next to me is a neighbor that has a little less space in his backyard but still can enjoy the nice view. To see it though, he would need to face a little towards my property. So, while I can look straight out, he needs to look at like a 45-degree angle in order to get the view. This is due to a natural hill that acts almost like a wall for the back of his property. He moved in a while back and has always seemed a bit strange to me. Nothing crazy, just things like repainting his house 3 different times in a single year to different colors and building a shed only to tear it down and rebuild it 5 feet away. Also trying to tell the neighbors what they can and can't do despite being new while the rest of us lived here a long time. Things started to come to a boil when he decided that my backyard was going to be his backyard. I am usually an easygoing person and I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. When I saw him sometimes on my property at night or even very early, I just assumed he wanted to get a really good view of the sunset or moon and moved over without thinking. That doesn't bother me too much because I know that it must suck to have half a view when everyone else gets a really nice one. The people that used to live there had my permission to walk over the property line when they wanted to get a nice view. There isn't a fence or anything, so it can be tricky to know right where my property ends and that one starts. Then he started leaving things out on my property like tools and a pile of wood. I was mainly worried that it would escalate more or that he may have not even realized that he was moving in on my property. The next time I saw him, I tried to be friendly and tell him the mistake. Me. Hi, I just wanted to let you know that this stuff is actually on my side of the property line. I would just really appreciate it if you could keep your things on your side. Neighbor. Look, I don't know if you think you can just pull the wool over my eyes, but this right here is my property. Heck, even where you are standing is mine, and if I want to leave things there I will. This guy clearly was not listening to anything I was saying. For the record, I was standing even further into my property when he said that, meaning he really thinks he owns my backyard. I tried again to tell him that I knew where the property line was, and he just shut me down again. The next day he showed me clearly fake paperwork stating that about half of my yard was on his side of the line. It looked like a world map where the lines seemed to be made at complete random for states and countries. I was not going to argue with him, and instead I paid to get an actual surveyor out to look at the land and mark where the line was. Neighbor was not happy when the official work showed that his things were on my side of the property line. He told me that he needed the space more than I did and he was going to make sure that he got what was his. At this point I was fed up with neighbor and decided that if he didn't want to play nice, I wasn't going to either. I mentioned before that I didn't have any kind of fence between the 2 properties. That was mainly so the past neighbors could move over and get a good view when they wanted it. It also was the only way for them to get a good view while staying on their property. With this new guy? Forget it. I was going to get a fence, and it was going to be one of the tallest ones allowed by the town in order to block his view as much as possible. He was warned by the builders, who were following the property line, that he had to get his stuff out of the way because it was going to end up on my property. He finally moved the stuff, and the fence was done being built. Personally, I found it kind of ugly and I am still thinking of ways to cover it up with bushes or maybe even ivy. Point is that his view is now totally ruined because of the fence and that natural hill blocking him. I wanted to go one step further just to show him how bad an idea messing with me really is. Watchtowers are common around here between people wanting to get a view and people trying to get a look into the woods for wild animals. It isn't the cheapest thing and something I wanted but put off getting for a long time. This was the perfect opportunity to get it, and when I put it on my property I was extra careful of where it went. To do one worse to this jerk, I not only took away his view, but now most of his property was in the shade of my watchtower. He moved here and wanted the amazing view and was left with nothing. He didn't take this sitting down and instead started to trespass on my land, and I even noticed markings on my watchtower like someone tried to take a saw to it before realizing how strong it was. I had had enough and finally took neighbor to court for all of his crap. I showed them everything I had from the fake surveyor report he gave me to pictures of my watchtower base being destroyed. Even pictures of his stuff on my property before the fence went up blocking it. They couldn't charge him for trespassing because I had no evidence, but I was able to get a restraining order against neighbor. This way if he did ever try to sneak onto my property again and I got a picture of it, he would be in big trouble. Instead of just being fined for trespassing, he could be fined or even arrested for going against the restraining order. I don't want to call the police on him, I just want him to get the message to stop trying to mess with me. I think it did the trick because I have yet to see him on the new cameras I installed. As for me, I am enjoying life more than ever and the view is the most amazing thing from the watchtower. Something about looking at water move and seeing the mountains in the distance can bring me a smile even on the worst days. I just try to not face the other way where I know neighbor will be glaring through his windows because he no longer gets this amazing view. The next story is titled, "Help My Roommate Rob Us and Make Us Homeless?" Bye, Army Officer Job. After my son was born and my wife almost died from pulmonary embolisms due to undiagnosed lupus eating her lungs. We finally managed to go on our first family vacation when my wife's health recovered. To preface this, we had to get a roommate to help with bills during this time, and a longtime friend was happy to help out and get a reasonable place to stay. Now, this is where Army Liar comes in. I had known this guy for almost 2 decades, spent entire summers at his family's place and even lived with him on multiple occasions. I genuinely thought of this guy as my brother, cried in each other's arms type shit. But as dumb people do, he developed a massive ego after his parents paid his way through Colorado State University Pueblo. He started hanging with the definition of Giga Chads, and all of a sudden is nothing but conservative politics and lying his ass off to get into the Reserve Officers Training Program for the Army at the college. This is important for later, working out at the college with his bros and generally being above hanging with people who couldn't have a golden parachute from their parents. So, Army Liar graduates, gets commissioned as an officer, and it's a shock when he wants to come hiking and partake of adventurous, generally wild college youth stuff. My roommate gets together with him and through the wonders of the World Wide Web, we had a great time. I managed to decompress from my almost dying wife, as well as the struggles of being a new father. Now, back to vacation, we visit family in Oklahoma. I had not seen my family in ages and it's a great time. When we arrive back home, half the whole house is empty. There is a note from roommate that Army Liar helped him move all his shit out and good luck. Understandably, this was a terrible turn off events. Any parent will tell you, you can't just plop some rondo in the now vacant room due to trust concerns and an infant present. Now, I'm frantic at this point. Tons of our shit is missing. Our marriage documents, birth certificates, lease, wife's 3DS and more, all gone. I start blowing the roommate up and Army Liar calls me. He proceeded to tell me he orchestrated it all because roommate was not really happy here and needed to move back to Central BFE, Texas. From Colorado. I know, it's silly. I am obviously upset, but Army Liar was my chosen brother, literally take a bullet for him. I explain that I am missing all the things I've noticed. This idiot has the nerve to say, "Yeah, not my problem." I was floored. He had spread some bullshit about me treating my roommate badly to his whole family and they stopped talking to me. These are people who essentially raised me, housed me, and who were better parents than my own. I'll confess that I did something then that I was not proud of at the time. I told Army Liar that if he won't at least help me get my things back, I would have to contact his army supervisor and explain how he essentially just helped rob me. He laughed and told me to go right ahead. In the end, I caved and didn't do anything. I was too mentally and emotionally exhausted, my wife was crushed, and my son was upset by our constant crying and worrying about how we were going to pay our bills. Ultimately, we lost our place and were forced to attempt moving back with my parents, which was not a solution because my mom is a terrible human and had filled every available space with foster children to game the state for money. We lived out of our car until I found a temp job in Houston, which ended and decided that they were done with the project I headed and terminated my position after telling me I would be moved to salary. Back to living in a car. This was the darkest time of my entire life thus far, and more than once I fantasized about driving my family off a bridge or into oncoming traffic just to escape this hell. I finally landed a stable job back in Colorado, was able to get counseling, and rebuild our life in a way that depended on nobody but myself. Happiness actually came back into our lives. My 2-year-old son would never remember this dark period, and I made friends who put Army Liar to shame. But what's this? I hear from some old friends that Army Liar dropped them like old garbage, and they missed him, wondering if I knew where to find him, and find him I did. Turns out bitch boy. Army Liar got married and was traveling the globe as an army officer, strongly exuding the whole 10 yards of my shit doesn't stink vibes. I remarked to one of my good new friends who just left the Navy that I couldn't believe they gave Army Liar a security clearance with all the things Army Liar had done in the past which would disqualify such a clearance. My friend told me that Army Liar most likely lied and had his new bro friends do all his interviews because if the Army found out they wouldn't have cleared him. Cue the gears to start turning. Turns out it's incredibly easy to get in contact with people who care in the Army. I talked through Army Liar's complete past, leaving nothing unsaid. I threw my own dignity to the wind and spilled every illicit detail of the shenanigans we were involved in as 18 to 23-year-olds, including the previously mentioned, relaxing, hiking trip. The one he took after his swearing in. Needless to say, guess who should pop up on my LinkedIn feed as transitioning out of the Army without a listed clearance? Now, Army Liar and his wife live at separate addresses, and I'm sure that has nothing to do with forwarding his past full of legally questionable deeds to her good Christian cell phone number, but we will never know. I now go look at his obviously depressed face on LinkedIn anytime I'm feeling down. Don't ever let people convince you to forgive and forget, burn those bridges down. They deserve it, and I promise it will be the best feeling you have ever felt. I know it was for me. The last story is titled, "The Customer is Always Right." About 9 years ago I worked at a food service job within a retail store. This job was absolutely horrible, as I got written up for anything and everything I did. If I took my breaks, write up. If I didn't take my breaks, write up. I called out once with a doctor's note saying that I absolutely could not work, as my illness was highly contagious, write up. This was my first time ever calling out, and I gave 48 hours notice. The second, and last time, was for my grandma's funeral, which I had requested off and was denied. I was written up then too. Any excuse my supervisor could find to write me up, he did. Being in high school at the time, I took this very personally and assumed that I had done something wrong. I worked there for 2 years, taking each write-up as a learning opportunity. However, I finally reached a point where I recognized that it wasn't my fault, and the malicious compliance began. In this job there were add-ons, and these add-ons came with an upcharge. I had customers complain to me constantly about not wanting to be charged extra, but normally they would just pay it and move on. One customer, however, refused to pay for the add-on, but wanted it anyway. I pointed to the sign which said that it would cost extra, and tried my best to politely explain to her that I can't give it to her without charging her. She demanded to speak to my manager. I happily called the manager over, as at that time the leader was also my area supervisor. Each day there was an overall leader which would cycle, but each department had their own supervisor as well. I'll call him Bob. Bob was employed through the retail store specifically. Regardless, I thought that surely Bob would have my back, as he knows the most about the rules that I had to follow. I was very, very wrong. After listening to the customer, Bob proceeded to yell at me in front of her, stating, "The customer is always right, and you are not paid to argue with her. Give her what she wants and do not charge her for any of it." He also informed her that I would be written up for this, and I was. From that moment on, whenever a customer complained about having to pay for an add-on, I didn't charge them for it. If they demanded their items for free, stating that they didn't like them or had a bad experience in the past, I gave it to them for free. After all, the customer says that they shouldn't have to pay for it, so who was I to argue? Of course, he meant that I shouldn't argue to the point of the manager being called, but he didn't specify, and I didn't want to be written up for it again, nor did I care to follow a do as I mean, not as I say policy anymore. It didn't take long for the people who worked in the actual retail store to learn that they could also get add-ons for free if they complained about it, as at the time that they were ordering, they were technically customers. Since each add-on cost between 60 cents and $1, and most customers wanted more than one add-on, the company was losing an average of $2 to $3 per transaction on the add-ons alone, not even considering the customers who got their entire order for free. Of course, $2 to $3 doesn't seem like much, but it was enough to catch the attention of my district supervisor, who I will call Ann. Anne was employed by the food service company, and her job was to oversee the branches that were inside retail stores. Anne was very nice and respected the employees who worked with her company, regardless of if they weren't employed directly by her company, as was my case. She first asked Bob about why our location appeared to be less profitable than other locations, and less profitable than it had been a few months previously. He tried to pin it on me, saying that I was stealing from the company by giving my friends and coworkers free items. Anne, understanding how serious of an accusation that was, insisted on speaking with me alone. I expected to be fired, but she instead asked me why profits had gone down. I explained to her what Bob had told me about the customer always being right, and how I had gotten written up and didn't want to be written up again, so I followed his instructions word for word. For the first time since starting this job, someone took my side. She agreed that not charging for those add-ons would explain the loss she was seeing, and that how Bob handled the situation was unprofessional and entirely against policy. Having Bob accuse me of stealing to protect himself was my last straw, and I put in my 2 weeks' notice that same day. HR had apparently taken notice to how Bob was treating me, as her exact words were, "It's about time, I'm glad you're finally standing up for yourself." With my consent, she altered some of the dates to make my end date be a week earlier than it should have been since the schedule had not been written yet. To this day I think of her as my guardian angel. Shortly after my last shift, I was informed by my friends that Bob no longer worked there as well. Anne was so upset with him that she called his supervisor and launched an investigation into his behavior. As it turns out, I was not the only one he would write up without a legitimate reason. They were also incredibly upset that he directly caused an unnecessary loss in profits. He could not blame me for it, as it was his words, and many people corroborated that he had said the same to them at one point or another. I was just the first to maliciously comply with his request, thus bringing his behavior to the attention of someone in a higher position than him. He was fired, effective immediately. Thank you for listening.